Welcome to the Georgia Show. It's what is today, April 2nd, and we have a informative show for you tonight. We got a lot of information we're going to get out, but first we got a surprise. Bill is going to show the world what a lip pillow does. He's going to put it in.
No, I'm not. No, but just to show that I did get them. There they are.
Outstanding. So support alppouch.com/CDM, our new sponsor with Tucker Carlson, his new nicotine pouch company. Don't use the woke Zen, use Tucker's Alp, and it'll support us too. So thank you. And also sign up for our no ad subscriptions. It's a big one. It really helps us. We had a little bug over the last couple of weeks because we changed our main domain from Creative Destruction Media to cdm.press. So that kind of screwed up the algorithm for a little bit, but it's fixed now. But if you go to the Georgia Record, georgiarecord.com, click on that ad, and you'll be taken to the place where you can sign up for our no ad subscriptions and get all of our content with no advertisements. 13 sites, and we're working on number 14 right now. CDM is really growing. Our video production effort is growing. Our shows numbers are growing, and we're really excited that we're kind of coming into our own after being suppressed heavily prior to the election over the last 4 years. But you know what? We have all the credibility, and now we're just going to scale it up across the board. We got, as I said, an informative show tonight. Bill, what's going to be on the agenda?
So first up, we're going to hear from David Clements. David has some very specific feedback, both regarding the Wisconsin elections, but also some funny backstage play that may be going on around that election and maybe others. He has a very interesting set of viewpoints and opinions on certain players. And very frankly, others are picking up on what he's noted. So we're going to hear about that first as we get going. We're going to hear about a gun bill which got, we'll call it shenaniganed in Georgia. They were expecting to be able to have a particular bill that prevents cities and counties from enacting prohibitive gun legislation that would take away some or potentially all of gun owners' rights at a local level. And they had penalties built into this bill to prevent that. And somehow things got changed. How? Well, we'll talk about that and we'll hear from the folks. We're going to hear about a controversy that's going on in Cobb County regarding their elections. We hinted at this in the last two shows, but now we've got some actual data to talk about. And then we're going to talk a little bit about this USAID set of money flows that we were guided into finding and then found more. And it looks like we're not done yet. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And boy, we might even slide in another mystery or two before the end of the show. We'll see.
So you have a Georgia legislature that is taking or putting in immunity for pesticide makers, which harms the citizens. They're looking to try to reduce their access to guns. I mean, what the heck is going on in Georgia? It sure doesn't seem Republican to me.
I don't know. I think I think we may find out that folks changed their name from Ivan to to Bob Smith at some point. I don't know, but it seems as if the masks are coming off and they're acting like we don't care. We're doing it, and it's infuriating to many citizens that understand what's going on, and to the folks at the Georgia Freedom Caucus who look and track this stuff, try to work with these guys straight up all the time, and they're just getting bamboozled. It's bad.
It's really bad, and you're seeing it not just in Georgia, across the country. You saw it in Wisconsin last night. We're going to talk about that with David Clements. I mean, just people in your face with nefarious behavior. But you know what? This has happened before several times, and the big one is the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia in 1918. So there is a precedence, and they did all the same things: let the criminals out, divide the society, create envy and anger against each other, and then they take over. So we got to be aware of that. And you know what? It took 100 years for Russia to get its agricultural production back, from 1918 to 2018, literally to the same level. They killed all the farmers, anybody who knew how to do anything. So we're going through a Marxist revolution, and we're going to stick on that subject over time as as this goes on. I'm going to turn it over to you, Bill. Let's get going. Who do we got?
All right. First up, we're going to hear from David Clements. Pay special attention to what he talks about, not just with regard to the elections and the fraud, but some of the other dynamics that are going on. And David has been just a wonderful friend of the show, friend to CDM, and we appreciate him coming on. We're going to have an announcement that you'll hear during this particular pre-tape. So here we go. All right. We are honored to welcome Professor David Clements to the show, especially today with all the shenanigans that appear to have happened up in Wisconsin. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Bill. It's good to see you.
So let's start there since it's very timely. There are thoughts everywhere, but they do seem to vary widely about whether we're even looking at a problem or whether it was turnout or whether it was shenanigans. What do you think as we start?
Well, I think this is a continuation of the same thing we struggled with leading up to November, which is there's this thing that I call perception theater. And there's a lot of people out there that will take credit for victories, and you have to kind of wait to see if the data really supports that conclusion. And I'm speaking specifically about kind of the leaders of TPUSA, Scott Pressler, because a lot of us that have looked at the data, we're sitting there going, how can you justify a claim that you delivered, Pennsylvania to Trump based on the registration figures? And then we look at the data and we don't see that there's really any difference between this last calendar year and 2020. And so you kind of sit there and scratch your head, because these folks will push back and they'll gaslight a lot of people that ask questions. And fast forward to this latest round of elections, what we're seeing is a lot of browbeating against the voter, that shame on you Republicans because you didn't turn out sufficiently. And it's really frustrating for people like myself that I'm sitting there going, wait a minute, we're seeing huge turnout numbers, historic numbers by Republicans. Seth Keshel put out a post recently with Schimel, the Supreme Court justice race, and he outperformed every Republican like in the history of this particular race. And yet it wasn't good enough. It's like, let's just castigate Republicans for, put more shoe leather into it. And what we're seeing is this wholesale avoidance, again, of the architecture, which is what I keep coming back to, which is, what are we really up against? Are we up against enthusiastic Democrats, or are we up against software and mail-in ballots? Yeah. And so I'm tired of just kind of getting sucked into this narrative that we should feel bad because we haven't been able to overwhelm the rigging. Let's solve the rigging. And so that's kind of where my processing is of all these things. I try to avoid the personal attacks and all those things, but when this is in my lane, specifically the lane of election integrity, I do take it personal, because I see so much time, so many resources being sucked into this messaging. And I'm left with this idea that the thought leaders, if you will, of conservative Inc., by and large, they're starting to get exposed. I really feel like this is a time, for the first time, where people are pushing back, and they're kind of just tired of seeing these anomalies where voter ID passes, yet a Republican gets trounced. I mean, it's almost impossible to reconcile these different data streams.
So let me ask you real quick. I was talking with Dan Eastman yesterday and this morning, actually, on our morning show. And his point was, this is depressing and demotivating the guy on the street, because he spends all this money, millions of dollars, works his tail off, votes, the voting numbers are off the charts, and then he comes in and there's a massive loss. And they see this over and over and over. So part of this may be psychological warfare. I'm, as a former special operations guy, I see this, and this is what they do, in the Middle East, et cetera. So what do you think?
Yes, to all of it. I mean, I think that's been the biggest learning curve for me, just understanding that so much of this is just narrative supremacy.
Yeah.
And, it's early on in, 2021, no one would believe what we're talking about right now.
Right.
And so it's been through painful revelation that, how much of this is real? How much of this is perception based on data that's put on election night reporting? How much of what we're seeing on TV through Seidel is real? And we're finding out that by and large, these are all fake projections that are part of an algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we saw very much what you're describing a few weeks ago in Arizona specifically, where it took them forever to try to get the vote totals done. And yet what seemed to be happening is they're trying to squeeze the desired results into a model that said, well, you couldn't have surpassed Trump. So it has to be somewhere between that and some other number. So it was almost watching an engineering activity. How do we make this fit so the number of challenges that will be posed will be the minimum? And it to your point, it seems that they kind of set it up front and then force fit it after the fact or through the course of the election. Does that kind of fit what you're describing?
It does. And I mean, like, look, and there's a lot of different talking points that are coming through from different influencers on how to deconstruct what happened in Wisconsin. Sean Farage, for example, he looked at the voter ID passing in Wisconsin as proof that there was no election fraud. And I took a different track, which is the bad actors out there are willing to let voter ID pass as long as they can keep the machines and the mail-in ballots as part of the ecosystem.
Well, there's a caveat to that. I was again talking to Dan this morning, and that law or that was passed, the amendment, all it says is that the legislature can decide, if what the actual law means. So it's not going to enforce voter ID. It's only going to give it to the legislature to write a law. So again, the legislature is controlled. So it wasn't as big of a win, and I wonder why the Trump White House is touting it as such a win.
Well, not only that, if you get the wrong person into the Supreme Court,
yeah,
and you have legal challenges on how to interpret it,
exactly.
The judiciary's basically has control here.
I think this may be the quote that you were just mentioning by Sean Farage, and the question is, if they cheated to win this particular race, why didn't they cheat to win the voter ID? And if you go back to some of the writings about the techniques used by everybody up to the CIA, I think, one of the techniques in irregular warfare is to make things look like they don't fit. So you have to face that kind of question that Farage is asking. Oh no, it must have been okay because this passed. No, that just means that one was left outside the cheat pattern so that you'd have plausible deniability.
Well, not only that, I think most of us that have been in this game long enough would find that most Republicans out there, even the rhinos, have always been behind voter ID. And so that tells me if they're comfortable with it, it must not be that big of an inhibitor on how you circumvent or subvert the election system. Mm-hmm. And so the main point of this post was that voter ID doesn't cure the chain of custody defects with respect to mail-in ballots. So as long as you can continue to inflate your voter rolls, you get on the voter rolls by showing your ID at some point. But once you're in the system, you're in the system. Mm-hmm. And so there's no threshold that bars you from submitting that ballot or submitting several ballots. And what we're finding are a lot of these NGOs that are funded by USAID in part are part of the matrix. And so they have access to all kinds of data. So you look at absentee ballot tracking software in particular, that's a suite that's part of the integrated software in every state. It doesn't matter which vendor you use, but in every state, you basically have crude data on how many absentee ballots were requested by Republicans versus how many were requested by Democrats. And likewise, you get up-to-date tallies on what's been returned. And so what that tells us is that you can now formulate a delta with the idea that, okay, registered Republicans are more likely voting for Republicans and Democrats are going to vote for Democrats. And so now, as long as you have access to the ballot and what it looks like, and everyone does because they put out sample ballots that we can all practice, take a look at, you can generate tens of thousands of ballots. And if you can generate realistic ballots, you can print things on envelopes too. So that's the other thing. When people talk about putting things in an envelope, submitting it, we have the ability to replicate everything. And there's really just no way to stop it. So until we solve that problem, I'm left with the idea that many of the people that are leading, Turning Point USA and Scott Pressler, they're not serious about solving the problem, which leads me to another series of criticisms, which is, and I can't take credit for this. There's a guy named Brian Ferentz that's been putting out all kinds of stuff about Pressler as of late, where he's, as a consultant, he's getting paid close to $700,000 a year. You're seeing auto text messaging from him, not from his personal cell number, but from whatever outlet that he's working with, that's telling people to donate to Win Red. All right. So this is a major red flag, because before we got on the call, we were talking about money laundering. Mm-hmm. And most of us have come up to speed that Act Blue is a major player in the money laundering that we're seeing. But yet you've got Win Red, which is the counterpart, and this smurfing phenomena of highlighting and finding individuals that are real and using their identity in the FEC database and submitting small donations to numerous campaigns across the country. The experts, whether it's Peter Berniger, Drowza Smith, Chris Gleason, they have all found that Win Red, to a smaller degree, is still part of that. Mm-hmm. So when we've got conservative activists that are basically, again, berating Republicans for not turning out, yet they're getting huge financial contracts to mesh themselves with entities like Win Red, there's major red flags everywhere. But the biggest red flag is that you've got a vested interest in protecting early voting, using these apps and devices, and not disturbing the status quo. And so when you've got people that have million-person followings that are literally, sucking up all of the energy in the grassroots, and the rest of us who are looking at the data are saying this just doesn't add up.
Well, I don't know anything about Scott Pressler, but I know that Conservative Inc. won't have the people on a regular basis like you, that we have on, like Gleason, like Eastman, like Eric Hovde, all these people in Wisconsin and elsewhere in Georgia. I mean, it's the problem all over. They won't have them on, and nobody will talk about this stuff. So it's obvious that somebody's in on something.
All right. Shall we take a break for just a moment, and we'll hear from one of our wonderful sponsors?
Yeah, I'll do an ad from John B. Wells. Here we go.
Okay.
I'm watching my friends gain more and more weight, and then eventually, I got to tell you, this is a little dark, but bad diet literally killed my whole crew.
Wow.
Diabetes, a stroke. I mean, all kinds of stuff. It's like, you had a stroke? You're not even 50 years old. You guys got to quit eating this stuff. Your body knows what's what. You're not conscious of this. But that's why people will go to the refrigerator and they'll grab this and that and the other, put together this outrageously elaborate combination of foods. Your body's trying to reach balance. Unbeknownst to us, our bodies are always trying to reach homeostasis. You can't eat all of this stuff and expect to live a long time. And one thing led to another, and I went, forget this. We're going to make our own product. So we partnered with one of the world's top 3 biochemists where nutrition-specific study is concerned. I said, all I want is the best nutritional and immune support product in the world. So we mixed it in yogurt. It's a powder. I got a bag of it here. I keep one on the console all the time, just so I can show people.
Yeah.
And it's a powder. Now, this is not candy. This is hardcore nutrition. And sugar is an enemy. And most people do not know that the reason these bellies are showing up on people all over the place, your body makes fat to store the toxins it can't get rid of. So it just puts them over here. But I can tell you this, you take this for 30 days and then lay off of it for 2 or 3 days, and you'll go, good grief, give me some more. Skin, nails, hair growing back, cut yourself and it heals in half the time.
Back to you, Bill.
All right, let's get back to our discussion with David.
Yeah. So like, look, again, I haven't validated independently the things that are out there, but right now there's a huge concerted, I guess, discussion, if you will, of many people that are on the ground in places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And these are people that we know, like the Tony Shoops of Audit the Vote PA. They do credible work. They don't have high visibility, and they're out there busting their asses to improve, you know, the landscape to negate election fraud. And out of nowhere, you'll have someone saying, "Hey, I registered 30,000 people in Pennsylvania, and Mr. Trump, you're welcome. We deliver Pennsylvania for you." And then you look at the actual data, and it's more like 7,000 voters registered.
Yeah.
Okay, that's misleading at best. Yeah. So, yeah. So Brian Friends, I don't know him personally, but he has been packaging together many threads like this, and appears to be, providing the receipts, at least from places that I've reviewed, and I haven't found anything on his messaging that that really gives me heartburn. So people need to be aware of this.
So I think what this is illustrating, if I understood the context correctly, he's showing that in 24, the number of registrations, additional registrations, was actually lower than the last cycle. So while folks are taking a victory lap saying, oh gosh, we changed the election by doing these things, the data doesn't seem consistent with that conclusion. And that's one of the crux of the questions that has to be asked. Is this the reason for a positive outcome, or was it something else? The other thing you mentioned, well, I believe you mentioned it, but others have, is the messaging. And you talked about it before, trying to make sure that people have a certain impression about, folks, and noting, this is also one of the pieces I think that he's developed, and it shows very, very similar quotes across many posts, using the words, in this case, national treasure. And there's pages of this. This is just this happens to be one page, but it would seem that these might be, bots or some other kind of mechanism to try to create an impression that supports this. Oh, well, we did this with, a particular movement of registrations or something else. It does seem concerning when you see things repeated like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I did see a post, and I read it briefly on, again, from Brian, that seemed to suggest the utilization of bots, right? Yeah. And this right here, what you're showing your audience, has all of the hallmarks of bots. And this is frustrating, because I've always wondered, like, whenever I would ask tough questions, and it was always accountability. I mean, a lot of people would try to gaslight me into thinking like I'm attacking him for, his personal lifestyle choices. And you'll find that I as a Christian, I've got my choices, but I never make it about, his sexuality. But what I find so alarming is that anytime I would bring up technical arguments about voting, I would get a bunch of projection, and they look like bots about, like, I'm attacking him for his lifestyle. And I'm just kind of scratching my head, like, where does this come from? Because I'm actually not bringing it there. I mean, he's posted photos where he's in bed with another man, and I don't take the bait. If I see this and everyone's talking about it, I bring it right back to early voting being a bad thing in mail-in ballots. And it's kind of one of these things where the bots have these almost, it's like we're not having the same conversations. Like, why do I have 20 comments about lifestyle when all I do is repost
It's highly organized, very sophisticated information warfare, in my opinion. I mean, that's what's going on.
It's remarkable too, in that we're seeing very much the same thing, but maybe not with bots, but with individuals here in Georgia that seem to be focused not on looking at the things that are important, but looking at breaking down folks that are potentially calling attention to those things that are important.
Well, I wanted to actually ask you all, what were your thoughts on the curling standing dismissal, since you guys are front and center for Georgia?
Oh my goodness. Probably the most telling one was, I believe it was Liz Harrington posted almost instantly with LOL. Here we are after 8 years, perhaps 8 or 9 years. We've been tracking it. We've tracked the original outcome, the original order or finding from Judge Totenberg. And then this ruling comes out saying after 8 years, the plaintiffs don't have standing. Standing.
Pretty amazing.
That's the first thing you look at, not after 8 years and millions of dollars. And so
You know what,
it was very frustrating for thousands that understood the dynamic here, I'm sure.
I think part of the reaction is very similar to you. We've been kind of, I think, making an effort to tell the truth on a lot of this stuff as to what's happening over a long period of time. And we were deplatformed, debanked, big time, censored, suppressed, and ridiculed. And now people are looking around saying, wow, that was the truth. So that's kind of what I see with this curling case. You had a lot of actors in Georgia betting the horse on that. And we kind of knew all along it was not going to happen. So we didn't know how it would turn out. But
yeah, my thoughts on it were no one knew what Trump was going to do in November of 2020. So I thought that the curling litigation was kind of a Trojan horse, because you've got language in her rulings back in October of 2020 saying it's not a matter of if Dominion can be exploited, it's just a matter of when.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like you're set up in the event that Trump was to proceed on executive orders against foreign interference and seizing the machines, that you have a lawsuit that's primed, ready to go. And you can then alert everyone that you can't trust whatever he says related to the machines. And you're primarily relying on Alex Halderman, who, while I agree is an expert, his utility to telling the truth when it matters has been all but zero. This is a guy that was basically put into a closet after Biden was installed. And to the degree that he provided his redacted report that showed that, the election files could be subverted, he puts impeccable trust that it's so hard to get a hold of this designer software to subvert it. So he gives complete unfettered faith in the dominions of the world that it's very hard to get. He never even asked the basic question of whether or not, if you've got bad actors within Dominion, could they not subvert the designer software way up the food chain? And when you start seeing all of the leaked texts and emails from Sheriff Darrell Leaf and Serbian actors overseas, people committing perjury about whether or not their devices are connected, he shouldn't have such a robust confidence in the dominions of the world. So you've got that part. And then you've got the recent executive order from Trump, which seems to have an impact on barcodes. And so you've got these ballot marking devices in Georgia. And so there's a chance there where maybe Totenberg's sitting there going, as much as we've tried to create an opportunity for people to continue using dominions in Georgia, Trump's going to have 3.5 years of the bully pulpit to use these EOs. And maybe they just know that they've used this lawsuit as long as they could. And at this point, as the truth continues to come out, it seems like curling's not going to be conducive to probably the purposes of bad actors that were behind the filings in the first place.
Interesting. Huh.
You mentioned a few minutes ago the notion of bloated voter rolls facilitating fraud by having essentially copies or extras of folks in the voter rolls that could be used without their knowledge. And it's very interesting. One of our trusted members of our state election board has been speaking in various counties around the state. And then while in the county, disclosing that particular county, based on the EAS reporting, has more registrations than voting age residents. So you literally have more registrations than people that live in the county. And in fact, Raffensperger has a case against him for failing to live by the requirements of the NVRA for not cleaning the voter rolls. And yet, just in the last couple of weeks, what has he announced? Oh, we're going to be finally purging our voter rolls of about 500,000 people. And of course, this comes after the 2024 election. It gets to the point where you kind of go, wow, Um, does anybody not see this? And yet some claim not to. They don't understand.
Well, the other thing is that most of the data analysts that I know that have scrutinized the voter rolls, they see a routine purge that happens after elections. And so it's weird. We have such a short recollection of history. Go, well, if we're cleaning up 500,000 people on the rolls, how is it ludicrous for us to suggest that those people are being used to generate fraudulent ballots, which are submitted into drop boxes? And these are valid questions. But then we'll kind of celebrate. We'll get like a headline of cleaning up the voter rolls.
Mhm.
It's like you haven't cleaned up anything. All you've done is designated active to inactive within a digital system. And invariably what happens right before your next primary or your next general election, all of those voters come back onto the rolls temporarily.
Yes.
Mhm.
And it's like, when will people just press pause to understand that there's a cycle? And you just look at the data sets going back, I don't know, 10 years, and you see the same phenomena, purging 500,000, then they show back up. In Michigan in particular, that's what happened in 2020, that they wanted to alert the clerks to not be alarmed when 500,000 voters were put on the rolls. Like it was on one particular day, I think in November. It's just insane.
Wow. Where do we go from here, David? What do you think?
I think to the degree that people have had their consciences, clear with respect to the grift that's going on, that we need to hold the political grassroots leaders in this movement accountable. Because I'm tired of crying over spilt milk when we know that it's the same sources of infiltration every single time. And I don't want to go through 2020 saying, we didn't get out the vote. We didn't get out the vote, when it's clear to me that if you solve the election issues with respect to mail-in ballots, the Dominions, the ES&Ss of the world, you're going to have Republicans that dominate if you could just remove that from the equation. So I think, what do we do from here? We continue to expose people that are promoting flawed processes. We shouldn't be embracing fraudulent practices. We shouldn't be trying to beat the fraudsters at their own game. We should be putting the fraudsters in jail. And I think Trump has given us a wonderful look into his mindset, which is, look, he's got an executive order that pretty much tells people to follow the law that's already on the books. But there's a question of whether or not his administration is serious about enforcing the law. So one of the things that I noticed was that everyone's got to come up to snuff on the VVSGs, the voter system guidelines. No one right now is currently up to date on certifications, which means if he means what he says, you cannot use any of the election machines based on the current accreditation landscape. So there's tremendous power in the executive order that was just launched if he's serious about it. So I try to just triage this from, okay, worst case scenario, he can't control a bunch of corrupt clerks. He can't make the states necessarily do what he wants. But with respect to federal races, he can use an executive order, and he really needs to couch things completely under the mantle of national security. Anytime you start getting sucked into Congress has to act, it's a losing battle, because everyone that's in Congress right now is in there as a byproduct of our rigged elections. So they're not serious about solving the problem. But to the degree that your viewers can research a case called Youngstown, this is the Youngstown Steel case. It's the preeminent decision dealing with national security. I would invite them to do that. And the premise behind the case was that the president basically seized steel materials. I got my dog here joining me. Decision. He seized steel from one of the steel plants in the name of national security to repel the enemy during, I think, World War II. And so there was this analysis about where does the presidential power to do these things from a war standpoint emanate? And when it comes to repelling an imminent threat, like say someone, shoots missiles at your country, president doesn't have to rely on Congress one bit. He doesn't have to worry about legislation. So if we saw our election systems as being breached by an enemy, he has plenary authority to basically do whatever he wants to negate and neutralize those threats. And so if he can couch everything under a national critical infrastructure prism, which he can do because Obama designated elections as part of the critical infrastructure, he should be able to do whatever he wants with respect to federal races. And so in 2026, there's a way to partition federal races from the state ballot and municipal races. And this is all about making sure that Trump retains the House and the Senate. And he can do that. So get a ballot that's super simple, 3 races, tops, easy to count. Perhaps, charge the National Guard with running an election and just do it one time. And I think what you're going to find is that the American people will see for the first time in 50 years that we're not a 50-50 country, that you're going to have an absolute beatdown in the House and Senate if you just have things done by hand in a very simple, straightforward way. So I'm hoping that's his intention, because if he doesn't get the House and the Senate in 2026, this experiment is over.
Yeah, completely agree. There's nothing from his people underneath him. You don't have any focus by Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, anybody on elections. I mean, they're going to get the death penalty for a guy who shot an executive. So what? That's not the problem, in my opinion.
I agree. I think we're all frustrated. I think today was supposed to be considered the Liberation Day, and I'm wondering, well, what does that mean? Is it because you're doing reciprocal tariffs? Is this something? Do I need to fill out a tax return? A lot of us are asking questions about what do we do. Liberation Day to me is you have accountability, where you've got all of these people that have committed de facto treason put in jail. Because if there's no enforcement, we have every right to remain cynical. And I look at this from a timeline standpoint of, even if you've got an executive order that tells us everything we want to hear, you've effectively got a year, a runway to start bringing civilians into the equation to run and administer elections without the heavy-handed government. And there's no way that the county clerks that we've interfaced with over the past 4 years are going to willingly participate in free and fair elections when they've been brainwashed into thinking that Dominion's great. So unless we see consequences, you're not going to see the clerks and the election officials that have administered elections do this because they're being told. If anything, they're going to tie up in the courts. In fact, Adrian Fontes, the Secretary of State in Arizona, has already expressly told everyone he's going to defy Trump's executive order. So I think that's the first test case is, okay, you want to defy it? All right, DOJ, you've heard the man, remove him. And we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So as we go forward, I wanted to share where folks can watch and stay up to speed on what you're posting, and you do quite a bit. So it's a great way of getting up-to-date information on your observations. The other thing you mentioned recently, that the movie that you created, Let My People Go, had been one of the most heavily censored movies perhaps ever. And so what we thought might be appropriate would be to, with your permission, go ahead and air that again on our channels tomorrow evening so that people could gain the information, because it's very comprehensive. It tells a lot of the story and helps people understand the dynamics that are played out here. If that would be okay with you.
Oh, Bill, you've not only do you have my permission, you could burn DVDs and sell them on street corners. I mean, we have given the film away legally. So I actually, in a message, I think in April, after we got investigated by the IRS and canceled by the processing companies, we used to said, like, look, whatever it takes to get it out there. So I literally have seen people that have bootlegged and have a DVD burner and have handed out copies for free. And I'm thrilled that that's happening. So to the degree that you all want to put it on one of your live streams or your channels, all I can say is thank you. Because we think it does the heavy lifting to at least have a smarter conversation about elections. I think people that watch that film will start to ask the right questions, because if you haven't seen it, seeing the infighting between Presslers and Charlie Kirk and the Bill Quinns and the Todd Woods of the world, they're too confused. They don't know how to come at it. It's all about, well, I think I trust this person, but they don't even know why they trust these people other than the fact that they're on TV and that they think that they're quote unquote patriots. And so we need to be committed to just really knowing what the truth is, what the facts are, and then the chips can fall any way that they will.
Yeah,
Cool.
One comment regarding the folks here in Georgia that I said to, I was in a luncheon with one of the folks that's pretty close to Trump, and I said, for what it's worth, please take back this message. There are people, I think we're up to well over 90 counties have organized their own county Doge activity because they realize we can't expect the Doge team to make it to Georgia instantly. But we have people all over the state willing to help. And these same people have been involved now for up to 4 years in trying to do the decode on what happened with 2020 and do the decode in what's happening now and try to make effective change. So, boy, oh boy, I have a feeling we're as prepared as any state to actualize what it seems to be President's trying to move us all towards. So, for what it's worth.
I'm excited. Look, I mean, the executive order that came out, it's not as explicitly clear as I would like on the machines, but if you've got the right people, you can certainly improve the landscape in an amazing fashion. There's other groups like the America Project that have taken a stab at the executive order, and it's not bad. I mean, I reviewed it. I know that Garland Favorito had some say in the drafting, and I know other groups that are really trying their best to get stuff to the president. And I don't think anyone needs to have ownership of the EO. What we need is to have iron sharpening iron and as many great ideas to get before the president. Hopefully they've already in their own, think tank exercises figured out what the best EO would look like. But we all need to be talking about executive orders from a national security standpoint because Congress will let us down. We know that Conrad Reynolds has got a great piece of legislation that he's behind with the Make Elections Secure Again. I've reviewed that. I know the author of that legislation, and it's surprisingly good. But you have the counterfeit ACE bill that's been put out there, which is all about having confidence in elections. It's not about dealing with election fraud. It's about subjecting everyone to this misguided belief that everything's fine. So I think if Trump's going to solve the problem, he's got to look at this like a wartime scenario. And he needs to draw from warlike powers, or this thing's going to get, it's going to get stuck in Congress, and we're not going to see the relief that we need.
Yeah, Todd, anything more?
No, that's it. Thank you for your time, David. Appreciate it.
David, thanks so much for joining us. I'm sure we're going to be in a position to hear from you again soon, and keep up the wonderful work that's now going into how many years? 5 more?
I'd like to get back to something else, but this is, look, we are all experiencing the wind at our backs in some ways. And it's really nice to be vindicated by the truth, because you all know better than anyone 2 years ago, we all felt like we were on an island saying out loud the things that we're discussing right now openly. So we just have to continue to refine the conversation and really hold to account the people that are quote unquote on our side. And I think that we're going to do that, because at some point the truth just has a way of reaching the people, and
sure does.
And that's happening right now. So I'm really encouraged by it.
That's great. We will look forward to seeing you again soon.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.
So, Bill, fascinating interview.
What a great dialogue, and just an amazing mind from Professor Clements. What a great guy.
Totally agree. I want to just highlight what we talked about in the break. Nucleo Boost. This is what it looks like. We developed this with Dr. Waterman and John B. Wells, and you can find out about it at cdmnutrition.com for our audio audience. But what does this do? I mean, it essentially provides, if you think of a highway with potholes in it, it levels the road for your body, so your body doesn't, when it's fighting disease, doesn't have to fill the pothole before it fights the enemy. So it really supports your immune system. I've had great experience with it, and others have too. People are different. For me, it's stamina. I find that when I'm, I've been on this for several months now, and it's fascinating how the days I'm just raring to go in the mornings after a good night's sleep, and you just have, you can go for longer. So check out Nucleo Boost at cdmnutrition.com, and you get the subscription, and it's cheaper. And Bill, I just saw something, and I just want to highlight the tariffs came out today with President Trump at his Rose Garden ceremony, and there's some things I wanted to highlight. Number one, Russia was not tariffed, which I find fascinating because I think he wants a peace deal. The UK was at 10%, much lower than most others, and I think Starmer's visit had something to do with that. And again, the peace deal. The UK has been one of the primary drivers of the Ukraine war. China, a total of 54%. Really fascinating. Israel at 17%. They thought they were going to get away with nothing after they dropped the tariffs to zero from their side, which they had been imposing on the U.S. for decades. So just some updates on the tariff situation.
Things continue to evolve quickly.
So I want to pay one more bill. David Cross, our financial advisor, is fascinating and really interesting to talk to. He knows the markets. You know, when I started on Wall Street, they said you need an advisor who's been through several bear markets and knows how to protect yourself, protect your portfolio. And David is definitely that. So give him a call if you need somebody to talk to. Can you run an ad from him, please?
This is a special report.
Knowing how to invest your money is harder than ever before. Dealing with stock market volatility, record debt, and terrorist attacks requires new thinking. At U.S. Asset Management, we can help you see the world more clearly so that you can move beyond the chaos and invest with confidence. Call us, visit us online, or drop by our office. U.S. Asset Management, helping you make better decisions with your money.
Okay, Bill, back to you.
All right, we're going to move quickly. We burned up a little bit more in the David Clements piece than we planned. So first, let's talk about this. So, whoops, that's interesting. Sorry.
Putting the
Let's
wrong
try
thing
that
up.
again. There we go. Okay. So there was shenanigans today with a bill that had been proposed to ensure that cities and counties were not trying to implement gun control laws and or gun limiting laws at the local level. And by doing that, it had a penalty of $50,000 for a city or county or other entity trying to enact such a law and infringing on someone's Second Amendment rights. Surprisingly, or maybe not for some, the bill went back and forth between a couple of committees, ended up, I believe, back in the Rules Committee in the House, and magically the penalty disappeared and got reduced down to the point where if a city was found to have encroached prohibitively on someone's gun rights, a judge could determine to fine them as little as perhaps $1. And so it took all the penalty, all the teeth out of the bill magically. The gun owners, Georgia gun owners group, along with the Freedom Caucus, yelled and screamed yesterday and today, trying to get this changed back. And we participated by putting an article up on the Georgia Record. So once again, we see this funny, backroom dealing that appears not to be in the best interest of Georgians, but appears to be, a very leftist kind of strategy. Let's sneak around and change a bill so it doesn't do what it was intended to do.
And damages your gun rights, which is a fundamental right that Americans have.
That's exactly right. So we will watch this carefully. We encourage folks to look at the Georgia Record, georgiarecord.com, and look for this article. You'll see this picture at the top of the article. Please consider just taking time to about 3 minutes to fill out an email form and send through that the legislators a message to say, please change this back so that it has the proper penalty in it and can do the job it was designed to do. Okay. So the next thing we want to talk about is an issue that we began alluding to about a week ago. Has to do with the Cobb County GOP elections. There were lots of movement just before the county convention. There was drama during the county convention. We had reports of people being not ending up on the delegate list for district and state that were originally submitted for such lists. We saw character attacks on Sophia Farouk and her slate of candidates who, very frankly, before all the drama started, seemed to have a very substantial following and lead in the Cobb County races. Comes now word that there's been a challenge brought forward, and it has to do with the candidate for GOP chairman for Cobb County, someone that wasn't even a member of the Republican Party before the precinct caucus. So by nature of that, come the county convention, this lady, Mary Clarice Hathaway, had to sit in the guest section because she wasn't a GOP member even early enough to act as a delegate or even be nominated as a delegate. The current challenge revolves around her legal domicile or residency. And what they appear to be challenging, I'm going to paraphrase, so attorneys don't hold me to the exact wording, but my understanding based on documents that I received today is the challenge revolves around where legally she appears to live. And here's the dynamic. She appears at first to live in Kennesaw at a property that she and I guess her husband have owned for some number of years. But back in 22-23, they executed documents to remove the homestead tax exemption that was on that property. Now, why would you do that? Well, what appears to have been discovered is they did it because they have a separate property. Here's pictures of it. Pretty good, pretty nice property up in Sunset, South Carolina, near Kiwi or Lake Kiwi. And in order to place a tax exemption on that property, South Carolina requires that you actually live there. And you must do a number of things. I believe you have to get a driver's license. You have to show that your vehicles are registered there. You have to show that that you intend to live in this location in order to get this tax exemption. And like most states, they have penalties if you try to say you're going to do one thing when you don't actually mean to do it. And so what appears to be the challenge is they appear to have moved their domicile based on filings with regard to tax exemptions and homestead exemption up to South Carolina. Is that what happened? Well, that's basically the challenge. It's going to be the process of going through the challenge, and I guess folks are going to try to find out what the truth is underlying this. Do they live in Kennesaw as originally purported? Have they moved and really live legally, or they keep a legal domicile in South Carolina? We don't know. We don't know how it's going to play out, but it is a fascinating dynamic. And if you walk back from it a bit, you have to ask yourself, these are legal questions. And have, both states have laws revolving around homestead exemption and being able to claim and substantiate tax exemption in South Carolina. Seems a lot to go through and risk to take a official position in your local GOP when you didn't even belong to the party a month and a half ago. So we don't know what's going to happen, but I'm pretty certain it's going to be dramatic and potentially entertaining over the coming days as we find out what perhaps the truth is underlying all of this. We don't know yet.
Interesting.
Yep. So let's go back if we can. We're going to spend just a couple of minutes, and we'll just basically prep folks for something they're going to find in the Georgia record that we've been working on these last few days, and it has to do with USAID money flow, funding flow. And you heard David Clements speak of this and talking about how the NGOs, some of them anyway, have used money and moved it back and forth and so forth. And it is a complex web of money movement. It's meant to do that in many cases, we believe. And Elon Musk has spoken about Soros actually being an amazing genius, I think is what the term was that he used, in knowing how to set up an NGO, spend very little money doing it, and yet use it to get U.S. grants, government grants from USAID and potentially others, and then use that money to create perhaps other NGOs, to move it around and to make it perform in ways that in most cases, it was not originally intended to do. One of the things we found is that seemed to, based on some recommendations and referrals that we received, we began looking at an article that listed someone known locally, Debbie Dooley, or Deborah Dooley, and it seemed to indicate that she'd been working with or supported by or in some way associated with an NGO known as the U.S. Energy Foundation, San Francisco-based NGO, and then there was another comment that was interesting that we'll explore in a future discussion. Had to do with something going on between her and presenting or attending something, along with Nancy Pelosi's daughter, Christine Pelosi. So we'll come back to that part. But we started looking into this notion of NGOs moving money around, and there's a tool online from an X account known as Data Republican, and it allows you to put in the name of an organization, the name of an individual, and begin to look and see if that organization or individual is found in one or more of these connections, if you will, between NGOs from which money seems to be flowing from USAID. And indeed, when we looked at United States Energy Foundation, we found a connection. And here it is. And if you look at the way that the arrows, and anybody can look up this chart, it's simple. We've put the link in one of the articles, and you can literally pull up the same chart, and you can see how these are connected. There's arrows between them showing money flow. Data Republicans is very careful to explain that you don't necessarily see how much, you don't necessarily see the timing, but you can see the relationship. And in some cases, that's more important. So here was United States Energy Foundation. They are connected to the National Democratic Institute for International Studies. There isn't room for the entire title, but you can do research on them, and we find people associated with that organization, including, I believe this is the one that has Stacey Abrams and Donna Brazil and others attached to it. And then behind that is something even much more troubling, Tides Center. And folks that have studied the nefarious side of politics for some time will recognize this as part of the web of organizations that rest somewhere underneath George Soros and his son, Alex Soros. And then lastly, in this particular chain, we noted the National Endowment for Democracy. And that too has some very interesting folks in its background, Kissinger and Madeleine Albright, I believe, and a couple others. But more importantly, what is it? Why were all these feeding money from one to another and ultimately ending up in U.S. Energy? Now, for folks that want to learn more, we recommend that they go read the article. There's now two, because two different NGOs were brought to our attention within that same New York Times article. So we ended up looking at them both. Both, believe it or not, had in some ways quite similar money flow going to them. And they both appeared to be trying to promote either solar energy or other types of alternative energy. Solar was mentioned in many cases. And in fact, one of them cited that Ms. Dooley was working with legislators and others to promote the use of solar energy and solar panels. The challenge with that is at about this same time, this article comes from 2018, about that same time, Trump was putting in place certain tariffs, one of which affected solar panels. Why? Because the majority of these are made in China. Mm-hmm. And the rest are, there are some, I guess, that are made in other parts of the world, or maybe a few here in the U.S., but the vast majority come from China and then other Far East providers. So it is concerning. It's a concerning picture. And we've, as of late today, it appears we aren't quite done with this whole story. So we'll have more, we believe, in the coming couple of days.
Great investigative reporting, Bill. Thank you.
Again, can't do it without the people that are out there in Georgia. Thank you, and they know who they are, and our appreciation really goes to them and their work.
Fantastic. Do you have anything else for tonight, or is that it?
That's it for the time being. I suspect we're gonna. Why do I suspect? I just do. We're gonna have more by our next show, and we will look forward to bringing it to you.
So we'll see you at 7 p.m. or excuse me, 2 p.m. on Sunday. I'll be on the Skiff tomorrow morning, 10 to 12, Monday through Friday Eastern. The audience for that is growing rapidly. Put cdm.press in your scan, put the Georgia Record in your scan, check us a few times a day, and that really helps us with traffic. And the traffic is really growing after being suppressed heavily prior to the election with the Global Engagement Center and, USAID and all that stuff that was happening to truth-telling media. So we really appreciate that. And that's all I got, Bill. We'll see you next time.